The art gallery buzzed with energy, the air thick with the mingling scents of expensive perfume and catered hors d'oeuvres. On its opening night, the gallery glittered with superficial glamour, a showcase of wealth and taste. Spotlights illuminated the walls, where paintings hung with clinical precision, each with price tags more suited to a home in the Hamptons than a canvas. Conversations hummed, laughter tinkled like glass, and champagne flowed freely. Detective Ava Ramirez stood at the edge of the room, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. Her leather jacket and practical boots clashed against the tailored suits and designer dresses, but she didn't care. She wasn't here for the art or the people. It was her instinct that had brought her, a feeling she couldn't shake, that something was about to go very, very wrong. And then, it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the gallery into darkness. The chatter turned to murmurs of confusion before a piercing scream cut through the void. The lights surged back to life, and the room seemed to collectively exhale until someone shouted, "Call 911." Ava was already moving, weaving through the sea of stunned onlookers. Her badge flashed as she barked for people to step aside. The scream had come from the private studio in the back, a space reserved for the evening star artist, Eleanor Vance. Ava pushed open the studio door and froze. The room was chaos incarnate, a stark contrast to the pristine gallery. Paint splattered the walls, canvases were scattered across the floor, and Eleanor Vance, the reclusive genius whose work had commanded millions, lay crumpled near a half-finished painting. Blood pooled beneath her, the handle of a knife protruding from her chest. The studio was a world unto itself, its disarray a jarring reflection of the artist's inner turmoil. Ava crouched by the body, her trained eye taking in every detail. Eleanor's death was a clean kill, a single, precise stab wound to the heart. There were no signs of a struggle, but Ava's attention was drawn to a faint mark on the back of Eleanor's hand, like a puncture wound. Nearby, an empty space on the wall caught her eye, a painting, conspicuously missing. This wasn't just a robbery. Something about the scene felt deeply personal. The unfinished painting Eleanor had been working on seemed to scream for attention, its vivid colors and jagged strokes exuding raw emotion. Ava's gut told her this was more than theft. It was a crime of passion. Back in the main gallery, Ava questioned Liam Sterling, Eleanor's young, handsome protégé and rumored lover. He looked disheveled, his tailored suit wrinkled and his hair falling into his eyes. "I was across the gallery when the blackout happened," he said, his voice tight with barely restrained panic. "It had to be a robbery. Eleanor's most valuable painting is missing, her masterpiece." Ava studied him carefully. He seemed genuinely distressed, but something about his demeanor didn't sit right. "And you didn't see or hear anything unusual?" she pressed. He shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "No. I swear. Someone must have been after the painting." The gallery's owner, a flustered man named Victor Klein, wrung his hands as he described Eleanor's volatile relationships. "She was brilliant, but difficult," he admitted. "She didn't trust anyone, not even Liam, except when it suited her. But he made her happy, or as happy as she could be." Victor mentioned that Eleanor had a habit of keeping her best work hidden. "She always said the world didn't deserve to see her masterpieces. The one that's missing tonight? She called it her most prized possession." His words lingered in Ava's mind as she returned to the crime scene. The missing painting, the unfinished work, the faint puncture wound on Eleanor's hand, it all pointed to something more complex than a simple robbery. Ava's suspicions deepened when she learned that Liam had vanished. Security footage showed a hooded figure entering the gallery shortly before the blackout, but there was no sign of Liam on the cameras. It was as if he had managed to avoid every detection device in the building. Ava's mind raced. Liam wasn't just a suspect, he was the linchpin of the mystery. Determined to uncover the truth, she dug into Eleanor's personal files. What she found painted a troubling picture. Eleanor was wealthy beyond imagination, but her financial records revealed large, unexplained transfers to offshore accounts. And then there were the letters. Love letters from Liam, passionate at first but growing darker and more resentful over time. Ava's stomach turned as she read the final letter, its words laced with anger and betrayal. This wasn't just about money. It was personal, deeply, painfully personal. Tracking Liam's cell phone, Ava discovered he had been in contact with a woman named Sarah Lang. The name triggered a sense of déjà vu. Ava couldn't place it at first, but something about Sarah felt familiar, like a shadow she couldn't quite catch. She followed the thread, connecting dots that led her to a black market art dealer known for brokering illicit deals involving stolen masterpieces. Sarah's name came up again and again, a recurring thread in the tangled web of Eleanor's life and death. Ava revisited the crime scene, her eyes drawn once more to the unfinished painting. Something about it gnawed at her. She examined the canvas closely and found a small, ornate key hidden behind it, its handle shaped like a coiled snake. The symbol sent a shiver down her spine. She had seen it before, and connection with the art dealer Sarah was tied to. The pieces were falling into place. Ava's investigation led her to a remote gallery on the outskirts of the city, a place where Sarah and the dealer were rumored to conduct their business. She approached cautiously, her instincts screaming that she was walking into a trap. Inside, she found Liam and Sarah standing before the missing painting, now locked with an elaborate mechanism that seemed more like a puzzle than a security measure. Sarah greeted Ava with a cold smile. "You've been busy, detective," she said. "But you're too late. This painting belongs here, where it was always meant to be." Ava wasn't buying it. "Cut the act," she snapped. "I know you've been playing both sides, using Liam and Eleanor to get what you wanted. This was never about art, it was about power." The tension in the room was electric as Sarah's mask of composure cracked. "Eleanor was a tyrant," she spat. "She used people and discarded them when they were no longer useful. Liam and we were just tools to her. But we took control. We ended it." Liam, visibly shaken, tried to defend himself. "I only wanted her to love me," he said, his voice breaking. "But Sarah, she made me see the truth. Eleanor was never going to let me go." Ava's gaze darted between them, piecing together the twisted dynamics of their relationship. Sarah had manipulated Liam, feeding his insecurities and stoking his anger until he was willing to do anything for her, including murder. Then, it all unraveled. Liam, realizing how deeply he'd been used, turned on Sarah. "You said it would be clean," he shouted. "You said no one would get hurt." Sarah's eyes flashed with cold fury. "And you believed me," she sneered. "You were always so naive, Liam. That's why Eleanor never respected you." The confrontation escalated into chaos. Liam lunged for the painting, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage of his life. Sarah drew a weapon, her desperation turning deadly. Ava had no choice. Her training took over, and in the span of a heartbeat, it was over. Sarah and Liam lay motionless, their schemes and betrayals silenced forever. The aftermath was a blur. The painting was recovered, its secrets intact, and the gallery was eerily quiet as the police processed the scene. Ava returned to her office, the weight of the case pressing down on her. She studied the painting, its layers of color and emotion revealing a story Eleanor had never intended to share. Beneath the surface, Ava found a hidden message, a series of coordinates leading to a secluded beach. She followed the trail, uncovering yet another layer of the mystery, the art dealer, the true puppet master behind it all. The final confrontation was swift and brutal. Ava and her team stormed the dealer's hideout, recovering stolen masterpieces and bringing the criminal empire to its knees. But as she stood on the beach, the wind whipping through her hair, Ava felt no triumph. The case had revealed the darkest corners of human nature, greed, betrayal, and the lengths people would go to for power. She returned to the city, her resolve hardened. The painting was displayed in the gallery, a tribute to Eleanor and a reminder of the cost of ambition. Ava knew her work was far from over. The city was beautiful, yes, but it was also tainted. And as long as darkness lurked in its corners, she would be there to bring it into the light. Detective Ava Ramirez sat in her dimly lit office, the only sound the rhythmic tapping of her pen against the desk. The case had been closed, or as close to closed as these things ever got. Sarah Lang and Liam Sterling were dead, the infamous painting recovered, and the black market art dealer behind bars. On the surface, it should have been a victory. But there was still something gnawing at Ava, a shadow of doubt creeping into the edges of her mind. The coordinates hidden in Eleanor Vance's painting had led Ava to a cache of stolen art, yes, but also to something more, a ledger. The ledger was written in Eleanor's hand, filled with names Ava didn't recognize and cryptic notes that hinted at deals, betrayals, and hidden alliances. It was clear Eleanor had been involved in something far deeper than just painting masterpieces. The ledger spoke of a network stretching across the globe, a network where art wasn't just art, it was currency, leverage, and power. Ava flipped through the pages for the 100th time, her fingers tracing the scrawled notes. She could feel it in her gut, this wasn't over. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Victor Klein, the gallery owner. He sounded frantic. "Detective Ramirez, you need to come back to the gallery. Now." Ava didn't waste time asking questions. She grabbed her coat and headed out, her mind racing. The gallery had been cordoned off since the night of the murder, with officers posted around the clock. Whatever had Victor so spooked, it had to be big. When she arrived, Victor was pacing in the lobby, his face pale and his hands trembling. "It's the painting," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one you recovered. It's changed." Ava frowned. "What do you mean, changed?" Victor led her into the main gallery, where the recovered painting hung under heavy security. The glass case protecting it had been left untouched, the locks unbroken. But as Ava stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat. The painting was different. Subtle changes in brush strokes, colors that seemed to shift under the light, and a new detail she was certain hadn't been there before, a small, shadowy figure in the background, almost hidden among the layers of paint. The room felt colder somehow, the air heavy with an unspoken tension. "This wasn't here before," Victor said, his voice trembling. "I know this painting like the back of my hand. Something's wrong with it." Ava leaned in, her eyes narrowing. It was impossible, paintings didn't just change. But then again, this case had been anything but ordinary. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo, intending to study it later. "Has anyone been near the painting?" she asked. Victor shook his head vehemently. "No one. The security footage will prove it." Ava didn't need to see the footage to believe him. The painting had been under constant surveillance since its recovery. If someone had tampered with it, there would have been evidence. But there wasn't. Which left one question: how was it possible? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing again. This time, it was Dana Reeve, the forensic accountant who had helped crack the case. Dana's voice was sharp, urgent. "Ava, I just finished going through Eleanor's financial records again. There's something you need to see." Ava left the gallery, her mind spinning. She met Dana at her office, where the accountant had spread out pages of documents across her desk. "Look at this," Dana said, pointing to a series of transactions. "These are transfers Eleanor made in the months leading up to her death. They're all to offshore accounts, but here's the kicker: the accounts don't just belong to her." Ava leaned over the desk, her eyes scanning the documents. The accounts were linked to names she didn't recognize, but one stood out: Sarah Lang. She was paying Sarah? Ava asked, her brow furrowing. Dana nodded. Not just paying her, funding her. These amounts aren't small. Whatever Sarah was doing, Eleanor was bankrolling it. Ava's stomach turned. Eleanor and Sarah's relationship had been twisted enough, but this added a new layer of complexity. Why would Eleanor pour so much money into someone who ultimately betrayed her? Unless it wasn't betrayal. Not entirely. Do you have anything else? Ava asked. Dana hesitated, then slid a folder across the desk. This is going to sound crazy, but I found references to something called the Covenant. It's mentioned in Eleanor's ledger and in a few of her financial notes. I couldn't find much about it, but from what I can piece together, it's some kind of secret society. High-level collectors, dealers, and artists, people who treat art like it's the key to something bigger. Ava stared at the folder, her pulse quickening. The Covenant. It sounded like the kind of thing that belonged in conspiracy theories, not police investigations. But considering everything she'd uncovered so far, she couldn't dismiss it outright. She spent the rest of the night poring over the documents, trying to make sense of the fragmented information. The Covenant seemed to operate in the shadows, its members bound by secrecy and a shared obsession with art. But what was their purpose? And how was Eleanor connected to them? The next morning, Ava's questions deepened when she received a package at her office. It was unmarked, with no return address. Inside was a single item, a small, intricately carved figurine of a snake, coiled tightly around itself. It was identical to the key she'd found hidden in Eleanor's painting. Attached was a note, written in elegant, looping handwriting, "You're closer than you think, detective. But the truth comes at a price." Ava's heart pounded as she stared at the note. Someone was watching her, someone who knew exactly what she'd uncovered. She felt the weight of the figurine in her hand, its surface cold and smooth. It wasn't just a clue, it was a warning. She knew then that the case wasn't over. Eleanor's death, the stolen painting, the Covenant, it was all connected, threads of a larger tapestry she was only beginning to unravel. And whoever was behind it wasn't going to let her dig any deeper without a fight. But Ava Ramirez wasn't one to back down. Not now, not ever. She took a deep breath, steeled her resolve, and prepared to dive back into the darkness, determined to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Ava stared at the figurine for what felt like an eternity, the snake's coiled form a perfect metaphor for the tangle of secrets she was now caught in. The note taunted her, its elegant script both a challenge and a threat. Whoever had sent it knew her movements, her investigation, and perhaps even her doubts. She knew she should turn it over to evidence, but instead, she slipped it into her desk drawer. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was personal. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and relentless digging. Ava pored over Eleanor's ledger and the documents Dana had uncovered, cross-referencing names, dates, and locations. The Covenant loomed larger with every connection she made, its shadow stretching across the art world like an invisible web. Galleries, auction houses, private collections, each thread led to a new name, a new secret. But the heart of it all was still obscured, shrouded in layers of deception. The figurine haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than a warning. It was a message, a clue left deliberately in her path. She researched its design, finding that the snake motif was a recurring symbol in ancient art and mythology, often associated with transformation, power, and secrecy. But this particular carving was unique, its style reminiscent of a lost era. It was old, older than she could have imagined, and its origins were impossible to trace. It was as if it had emerged from the shadows of history itself. The break came late one night, when Ava was combing through the gallery's surveillance footage for the 100th time. She had all but memorized the comings and goings of every guest that night, but something about the hooded figure who had entered before the blackout still didn't sit right with her. She zoomed in on the figure's silhouette, enhancing the image as much as the grainy quality allowed. And then she saw it, a glint of something metallic on their wrist. A bracelet? No, a cuff. She froze the frame and leaned in closer. The design was unmistakable, a snake, coiled tightly around the figure's wrist. Her heart raced. Whoever this person was, they weren't just a thief. They were connected to the Covenant. The next morning, Ava called Dana, her voice sharp with urgency. "I need you to dig deeper into Eleanor's accounts," she said. "Look for anything tied to private auctions or underground sales. And see if you can find any references to artifacts with snake motifs." Dana didn't hesitate. "I'll get on it. But Ava, be careful. Whoever these people are, they're playing a different game." Ava hung up and leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. She needed more than financial records and cryptic clues. She needed someone on the inside, someone who could lead her deeper into the Covenant's world. And she knew exactly who to reach out to. It had been years since Ava had spoken to Julian Cross, an ex-thief turned informant who now lived a quiet life running a small antique shop. Julian had once been one of the best in the business, specializing in high-stakes art thefts and underground deals. If anyone could shed light on the Covenant, it was him. Ava found him in his shop, polishing a gilded frame with a practiced hand. He looked up as she entered, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Detective Ramirez," he said, his voice a mix of amusement and caution. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need information," Ava said bluntly. "And you're the only one who can give it to me." Julian set the frame aside and gestured for her to sit. "It's always about information with you. What is it this time? Stolen artifacts? Forged paintings?" She pulled the figurine from her pocket and placed it on the counter. Julian's expression changed instantly, his casual demeanor replaced by something darker. He stared at the snake, his jaw tightening. "Where did you get this?" "It found me," Ava said. "And I need to know what it means." Julian exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing the figurine like it might bite. "This isn't just a trinket, detective. It's a marker. A symbol of allegiance to something most people don't even know exists." "The Covenant," Ava said. Julian's eyes flicked to her, sharp and assessing. "So, you do know. Then you know how dangerous this is." "I know enough to know I need answers," she said. "And you're going to give them to me." Julian hesitated, then nodded. "The Covenant is more than a secret society. It's a machine, centuries old, built on the trade of power and influence. Art is their currency, but it's also their weapon. Every piece they acquire, every deal they broker, it's all part of a greater game." "What kind of game?" Ava asked. Julian's eyes darkened. "Control. The Covenant doesn't just collect art, they collect people. Artists, collectors, dealers, even law enforcement. They use them, manipulate them, and discard them when they're no longer useful. Eleanor Vance was one of theirs." Ava's breath caught. Eleanor was part of the Covenant? "Not just part of it," Julian said. "She was one of their most prized assets. Her paintings weren't just art, they were messages, codes meant for other members. That's why her work was so coveted. And that's why she died." The weight of his words settled over Ava like a shroud. Eleanor hadn't just been a victim, she had been a player in a game Ava was only beginning to understand. And her death was more than a crime of passion. It was a warning. Julian leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you're smart, you'll walk away. The Covenant doesn't forgive, and they don't forget. You've already stepped too far into their world." Ava met his gaze, her resolve hardening. Walking away isn't an option. Julian sighed, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. "Then you'll need more than just information. You'll need allies. And you'll need to be willing to do whatever it takes." Ava left the shop with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear, the game was far from over. The Covenant was watching her, waiting to see her next move. And Ava Ramirez wasn't about to let them win. She would uncover their secrets, expose their lies, and bring their empire crashing down, even if it meant risking everything. Ava's mind raced as she drove through the city, Julian's words echoing in her head. The Covenant wasn't just a shadowy organization, it was an institution, one that had operated for centuries, its roots buried deep in the underbelly of power and influence. And Eleanor Vance had been one of its key players. The thought made Ava's stomach churn. Eleanor had been painted as a tortured genius, a recluse whose work transcended the boundaries of art. But now it was clear her masterpieces had been more than expressions of emotion, they had been tools, weapons in the Covenant's arsenal. And that meant the painting Ava had recovered was more dangerous than she'd realized. As night fell, Ava returned to her office, the figurine still in her pocket. The precinct was quiet, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the walls. She spread out everything she had on the case: Eleanor's ledger, the financial records Dana had uncovered, the surveillance photos, and now, the figurine. Together, they painted a picture of a conspiracy so vast it was almost incomprehensible. But Ava didn't need to comprehend it all, she just needed to find the next thread to pull. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was Dana. "Ava, I found something," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "You were right about the offshore accounts. They're linked to a series of private auctions held in different cities around the world. And the next one is happening tomorrow night. In our city." Ava's grip on the phone tightened. "Do you have a location?" "It's being held at a private estate on the outskirts of town," Dana said. "But Ava, this isn't just an art auction. It's invite only, and the guest list is, let's just say it's a who's who of people you don't want to mess with. Politicians, CEOs, even members of the art world's elite. If the Covenant is involved, they'll be there." Ava's mind raced. This was her chance to get inside, to see the Covenant in action. But it also meant walking into the lion's den. "Send me everything you have," she said. "And see if you can get me an invite." Dana hesitated. "Ava, this is dangerous. If they find out you're not one of them." "I know the risks," Ava said. "Just get me in." The next day was a blur of preparation. Dana worked her magic, fabricating an identity for Ava that would hold up under scrutiny. Ava studied the guest list, memorizing names and faces, and practiced the role she would play, a wealthy collector with a taste for the rare and forbidden. By the time night fell, she was ready, or as ready as she could be. The estate was as opulent as she'd imagined, its sprawling grounds lit by lanterns and guarded by men in dark suits. Ava arrived in a sleek black dress, her hair swept up in a style she barely recognized. She handed her forged invitation to the doorman, her heart pounding as he scanned it. After a tense moment, he nodded and stepped aside, allowing her in. The inside of the estate was a world unto itself, a glittering maze of chandeliers, marble floors, and priceless art. The guests moved through the space with practiced ease, their conversations laced with subtle power plays and veiled threats. Ava felt the weight of their gazes as she entered, the sharp eyes of people who were used to getting what they wanted and who didn't trust outsiders. She spotted the auction room at the far end of the hall, its entrance guarded by two men who checked each guest before allowing them in. Ava made her way toward it, her steps measured and confident, though her pulse quickened with every step. She was almost there when a voice stopped her. "New face." Ava turned to see a man in his 50s, his tailored suit and silver hair giving him an air of effortless authority. His eyes were cold, calculating. "I don't believe we've met," he said, extending a hand. "Sebastian Greer." Ava forced a smile and shook his hand. "Evelyn Carter," she said, using the alias Dana had created for her. "It's my first time at one of these events." Sebastian's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained sharp. "A collector, I assume?" "Something like that," Ava said, keeping her tone light. "I've heard this is the place to find the best." Sebastian chuckled softly. "Indeed. Though the best often comes at a price." Ava resisted the urge to bristle at his patronizing tone. Instead, she returned his smile. "Isn't that what makes it worth having?" Sebastian's smile widened, though there was no warmth in it. "Touché," he said. "Well, Miss Carter, I do hope you find what you're looking for tonight." With that, he moved on, leaving Ava to exhale a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She continued toward the auction room, her nerves rattled but her resolve intact. She couldn't afford to let anyone see through her. Inside the auction room, the atmosphere was electric. Rows of chairs faced a small stage, where a series of items were displayed one by one. The bidding was fast and furious, the sums exchanged staggering. Ava watched as paintings, sculptures, and artifacts were sold to the highest bidder, each piece accompanied by a cryptic description that hinted at its true value. And then it appeared, Eleanor Vance's missing painting. The room fell silent as it was unveiled, its haunting beauty drawing gasps from the crowd. Ava's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the key to everything. The bidding began, and Ava knew she had to act. She raised her paddle, her heart pounding as the auctioneer acknowledged her bid. The room buzzed with whispers as the price climbed higher and higher, but Ava didn't back down. She had to win this painting, no matter the cost. Finally, the gavel fell, and the painting was hers. She felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. As the crowd began to disperse, she felt a hand on her arm. She turned to see Sebastian Greer, his expression unreadable. "Congratulations," he said. "But I must admit, I'm curious. What does a newcomer like you want with a piece like that?" Ava met his gaze, her mind racing. "Art speaks to me," she said smoothly. "And this one, it feels like it has a story to tell." Sebastian's eyes narrowed, his smile razor-sharp. "Oh, it does," he said. "But some stories are better left untold." Ava's pulse quickened as Sebastian walked away, his words hanging in the air like a warning. She had the painting, but she was far from safe. The Covenant was watching her, and the game was only just beginning. Ava left the auction with the painting securely in her possession, her mind teeming with questions. The weight of what had just transpired pressed down on her, but she couldn't let it show. Not here, not yet. As she walked through the estate's opulent halls, she felt the eyes of the other guests following her, their curiosity palpable. They weren't just admiring her bold acquisition, they were studying her, trying to decipher who she was and why she had outbid them all. She kept her expression neutral, her steps measured, but her heart was racing. She had taken a risk stepping into this world of shadows, and now she had something the Covenant clearly valued. Something they had killed for. Ava's instincts told her she was holding more than just a painting. This was a key, a puzzle piece, and possibly a threat to everyone in the room who coveted it. Her car was waiting for her at the driveway, and she climbed inside without a word to the driver. As the estate faded into the distance, she allowed herself a moment to exhale. The painting sat in the back seat, wrapped carefully, its haunting presence impossible to ignore. She glanced at it in the rearview mirror, her thoughts spinning. Why had Eleanor painted this? What was its purpose? And why had the Covenant been so desperate to retrieve it? She didn't have answers yet, but she knew where she needed to start. The painting wasn't just art, it was a message. The cryptic changes Victor Klein had noticed earlier, the shadowy figures that had appeared in the background, it all meant something. Eleanor had hidden secrets in her work before, messages for the Covenant. This one might hold the key to unraveling everything. Ava's first stop was Dana's apartment. It was late, but she knew Dana would still be awake, her mind buzzing with the same urgency Ava felt. Sure enough, Dana opened the door in sweatpants and glasses, her face lighting up at the sight of Ava. "You got it," she said, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. "I can't believe you actually got it." "Neither can I," Ava admitted as she stepped inside. She unwrapped the painting carefully, setting it on Dana's dining table. The two women stared at it in silence for a moment, the weight of its presence filling the room. Dana leaned in closer, her analytical mind already at work. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But it's more than that, isn't it? It feels alive." Ava nodded. "There's something in it. Something hidden. I need you to help me figure out what." Dana grabbed a magnifying glass and a flashlight, her excitement palpable. "Let's get to work." The next few hours were a blur of analysis. They examined every inch of the painting, looking for clues, anomalies, anything that felt out of place. Dana's sharp eyes spotted details Ava had missed, subtle shifts in texture, layers of paint that seemed to conceal more than they revealed, and a faint series of symbols etched into the bottom corner. The symbols, Dana explained, were an ancient cipher, one often used in secret societies to encode messages. "It's a code," Dana said, her voice filled with awe. "Eleanor left us a code." Ava's pulse quickened. "Can you break it?" Dana grinned. "I can try." The hours stretched into dawn as Dana worked, her laptop humming as she cross-referenced the symbols against historical records and encryption databases. Ava paced the room, her mind racing. The stakes were higher than ever. If they cracked the code, they could expose the Covenant's secrets. But if the Covenant realized what they were doing, they'd be targets. Finally, Dana let out a triumphant gasp. "Got it," she exclaimed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, revealing a set of coordinates and a single word, sanctuary. Ava leaned over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing at the screen. Sanctuary? What does that mean? Dana shook her head. I don't know. But these coordinates, they're in the mountains, about 3 hours from here. Remote. Isolated. Ava's gut told her this was it. Eleanor had left them a breadcrumb trail, and it led to this place. We need to go, she said, her voice firm. Whatever's out there, it's connected to the Covenant. And I'm not waiting for them to come after us. Dana hesitated. Ava, this could be dangerous. If the Covenant's watching. They already are, Ava interrupted. But we're not running blind. We have the painting, the code, and the advantage. We're going. Dana nodded, her determination matching Ava's. Then let's do this. The drive to the coordinates was tense, the air between them heavy with unspoken fears. The further they went, the more desolate the landscape became, the winding roads narrowing as they climbed higher into the mountains. By the time they reached their destination, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The coordinates led them to an abandoned chapel, its stone facade weathered by time and the elements. Ivy crawled up its walls, and the wooden doors stood slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Ava stepped out of the car, her hand instinctively resting on the holster at her side. Stay close, she said to Dana as they approached the entrance. Inside, the chapel was eerily quiet, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. Rows of rotting pews lined the space, but it was the altar that drew Ava's attention. Behind it, a mosaic covered the wall, its design intricate and hauntingly familiar. The snake motif was everywhere, coiled around ancient symbols and patterns that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Dana pointed to the floor. Look, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. At their feet was a trapdoor, its edges marked with the same symbols as the painting. Ava's heart pounded as she crouched to examine it. This was it, the next step in Eleanor's trail. She gripped the handle and pulled it open, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. Are you sure about this? Dana asked, her voice trembling. Ava nodded, her resolve unshaken. This is what we came for. They descended the steps cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the inky darkness. The air grew colder, the walls narrowing as they moved deeper underground. Finally, they emerged into a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with shelves holding ancient tomes, artifacts, and paintings. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a single object, another figurine, identical to the one Ava had received. But this one was different. Its base was engraved with the name Eleanor Vance. Dana gasped. She was here. Ava approached the pedestal, her fingers brushing the figurine. As she touched it, a hidden mechanism clicked, and the wall behind the pedestal began to shift, revealing a hidden door. Ava's breath caught as the door creaked open, revealing what lay beyond. It was a vault, its walls covered in maps, documents, and photographs. At the center of it all was a table, and on it was a painting, unfinished, its strokes raw and chaotic, but unmistakably Eleanor's work. Ava stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she realized what she was looking at. It wasn't just a painting. It was a timeline, a map of the Covenant's history, its secrets laid bare in layers of color and shadow. This is it, Ava whispered. This is what they've been hiding. But before she could say more, the sound of footsteps echoed down the stairs. Ava spun around, her hand on her weapon, as a voice called out from the darkness. Impressive, detective, it said, cold and mocking. But you should have stopped while you had the chance. The Covenant had found them. Ava's pulse surged as the footsteps grew louder, echoing ominously in the tight underground space. She pulled her weapon, motioning for Dana to stay behind her. The voice that had pierced the silence was calm, almost amused, but it carried an undeniable menace. Whoever it belonged to wasn't here to negotiate. The figure emerged slowly from the shadows, his presence commanding. He wore a tailored black coat, his posture straight and deliberate, like someone who had always been in control. His face, angular and sharp, seemed carved from stone, and his piercing eyes locked onto Ava with unsettling intensity. Behind him, two others flanked him, silent, imposing figures whose bulk alone made them seem like living walls. "Well, Detective Ramirez," the man said, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've certainly made yourself a thorn in our side." Ava's grip on her gun tightened, her instincts screaming at her to stay sharp. "You're too late," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We know about the Covenant. We know what you've been hiding." The man chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that filled the chamber like a predator's growl. "Do you, now?" he asked, taking a slow step forward. "You've scratched the surface, I'll give you that. But you're playing a game you don't understand." Ava took a step back, shielding Dana with her body. "Then enlighten me." The man tilted his head, his eyes glittering with something that might have been amusement or disdain. "You think you're holding the cards," he said, gesturing toward the painting on the table. "But Eleanor's work is only a piece of the puzzle. She was one of us, Detective. She built her legacy on our backs, and in the end, she tried to betray us. Do you know why?" Ava's jaw tightened. "Because she wanted out." The man's smile widened, though it was devoid of warmth. "She thought she could outsmart us," he said. "She thought she could expose us, tear down what we've built. But the Covenant isn't just an organization. It's an institution. It's an idea. And ideas can't be destroyed." Dana's voice broke the tension, trembling but firm. "If that's true, why are you so desperate to stop us?" The man's gaze flicked to her, cold and calculating. "Because knowledge is power," he said simply. "And in the wrong hands, power is dangerous." Ava's eyes darted to the pedestal, to the figurine still in place. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her, the walls closing in. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and deep underground without backup. But she refused to let the Covenant win. Not here. Not now. She made a decision in the span of a heartbeat. "Dana," she said, her voice low and firm. "Take the painting. Run." Dana's eyes widened in panic. "What?" "No, I'm not leaving you. Go." Ava barked, her tone brooking no argument. "Find a way out. I'll hold them off." Before Dana could protest, Ava raised her weapon and fired a single shot into the air, the deafening crack startling everyone in the room. The man and his guards flinched, and in that split second of hesitation, Dana grabbed the painting and bolted toward the staircase. The man's composure faltered, his smile twisting into a snarl. "Stop her," he barked to his guards. Ava stepped into their path, her gun aimed squarely at the man's chest. "Not a step closer," she warned. The guards hesitated, their eyes flicking to the man for guidance. He raised a hand, signaling them to stand down, his gaze never leaving Ava. "You're bold, Detective," he said, his voice cold as steel. "But boldness only gets you so far." Ava's finger hovered over the trigger, her mind racing. She needed to buy Dana time, but she also needed answers. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What does the Covenant want with all of this?" The man's expression softened, almost pitying. "We want what everyone wants," he said. "Control. Influence. Immortality. Art is our weapon because it endures. It transcends time, speaks to generations." Eleanor understood that. She was a genius, but she was also a fool. She thought she could use her art against us. Ava's thoughts flashed to Eleanor's unfinished painting, to the coded timeline it contained. "She was trying to expose you," Ava said. "She wanted people to see the truth." The man's face darkened. The truth, he repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. The truth is a weapon, detective. And in the wrong hands, it can destroy everything. The tension in the room was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken threats. Ava's mind raced, searching for a way out. She couldn't take all three of them in a fight, but she didn't need to. All she needed was to stall them long enough for Dana to escape. You talk a lot about power, Ava said, her tone sharp. But all I see is fear. You're afraid of what Eleanor left behind. You're afraid it'll destroy you. The man's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. You don't understand what you're dealing with, he said. Eleanor's secrets won't just destroy us, they'll destroy everything. The Covenant is a necessary evil, detective. Without us, the world would descend into chaos. Ava took a step forward, her gun still trained on him. Maybe it's time for a little chaos. Before the man could respond, a deafening alarm blared through the chamber, the sound reverberating off the stone walls. The guards exchanged confused glances, and for the first time, the man's composure cracked. Ava couldn't help but smirk. Dana had triggered something, whether it was a security system or a failsafe Eleanor had built into the vault, Ava didn't know. But it was the distraction she needed. She moved quickly, using the confusion to her advantage. She swung the pedestal into one of the guards, sending him sprawling, and bolted toward the staircase. The man shouted after her, his voice echoing through the chamber. You can't run forever, detective. We'll find you. Ava didn't look back. She sprinted up the stairs, her heart pounding, the sound of pursuit close behind her. When she reached the surface, she found Dana waiting by the car, the painting clutched tightly in her hands. Drive! Ava shouted as she jumped into the passenger seat. Dana didn't hesitate. She slammed her foot on the gas, the car tearing down the mountain road as the chapel disappeared behind them. Ava glanced in the rearview mirror, her chest heaving. The Covenant would come after them, of that, she had no doubt. But for now, they had the upper hand. She turned to Dana, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. We have to protect that painting, she said. It's the only leverage we have. Dana nodded, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. What now? Ava's gaze hardened. Now we go on the offensive. If they want to play this game, we'll make sure they regret it. The Covenant had underestimated her. And that would be their downfall. As the car sped down the winding mountain road, Ava's mind raced to formulate her next move. The Covenant had revealed themselves, and now she and Dana were marked. But they had something the Covenant wanted, Eleanor's painting. And as much as Ava wanted to destroy it to keep it out of their hands, she knew it was their only way forward. Whatever secrets were embedded in those brushstrokes, they were powerful enough to make the Covenant kill and could very well be the key to dismantling their shadowy empire. Dana broke the tense silence, her voice trembling but resolute. Ava, we can't keep running. They'll find us. They have resources, connections, we're just two people. Ava glanced at her, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her chest. Dana was right. The Covenant wasn't a handful of criminals, it was a network of powerful individuals embedded deeply in the worlds of art, politics, and finance. Running wasn't an option. But fighting them head-on wasn't either. I know, Ava admitted. But we're not going to just run. We're going to make them come to us, on our terms. Dana shot her a wary glance. What does that mean? It means we need to find someone who hates the Covenant as much as we do, Ava said. We need allies. And I think Eleanor might have left us a lead. Dana furrowed her brow. What kind of lead? Ava reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the small snake figurine she had taken from the underground chamber. She turned it over in her hands, her thumb brushing over the engraving at its base. Eleanor left breadcrumbs. She knew they'd come after her, and she knew she couldn't fight them alone. This figurine, it's not just a symbol. It's a message. Dana frowned, her eyes darting between the figurine and the road. But a message to who? Ava's jaw tightened. We're going to find out. 2 hours later. Ava and Dana sat in a cramped motel room on the outskirts of the city, the painting propped up carefully against the wall. The room smelled faintly of mildew, and the flickering fluorescent light above the bed did little to ease the oppressive tension. Dana had her laptop open, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she scoured every database and archive she could access. Ava sat on the edge of the bed, the figurine resting on the bedside table next to a steaming cup of coffee. The engraving, Dana said suddenly, her voice breaking the heavy silence. It's not just Eleanor's name. There's a symbol here, look. She turned the laptop toward Ava, showing her an image of an ancient seal. It depicted a coiled snake encircling a series of interlocking triangles. What is that? Ava asked, leaning in closer. It's called the Ouroboros seal, Dana explained. It's been associated with secret societies throughout history. The snake eating its own tail represents eternity, cycles of destruction and rebirth. But the triangles? That's unique. It's been linked to a group called the Archivists. Ava raised an eyebrow. The Archivists? Dana nodded. They're a countergroup. If the Covenant is about control and secrecy, the Archivists are about preservation and exposure. They believe art and knowledge should be shared with the world, not hoarded by the elite. According to some accounts, they've been at odds with the Covenant for centuries. Ava's mind raced. You think Eleanor was working with them? It's possible, Dana said. Or at least, she wanted to. Maybe this figurine was her way of reaching out to them. Ava picked up the figurine, examining it more closely. If the Archivists are real, they might be our best shot at taking down the Covenant. But how do we find them? Dana hesitated, then turned the laptop back toward herself. There's a rumor that the Archivists operate out of a hidden gallery. It moves from city to city, popping up under different names. If we can find it, we might be able to make contact. Do you have a lead? Ava asked. Dana bit her lip. 1. There's an underground art exhibit happening tomorrow night. It's invitation only, but the host has ties to some pretty obscure circles. If the Archivists are trying to stay hidden, this would be the perfect place for them to blend in. Ava nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we're going. The next evening. The exhibit was housed in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. From the outside, it looked unremarkable, just another crumbling relic of a bygone era. But inside, the space had been transformed into a surreal wonderland. Sculptures made of twisted metal and shattered glass stood alongside paintings that seemed to shift and shimmer under the dim lighting. The air buzzed with whispered conversations, the guests a mix of bohemian artists, wealthy collectors, and people who seemed to exist entirely in the shadows. Ava and Dana moved through the crowd, their eyes scanning for anything, or anyone, that might hint at the Archivist's presence. Ava's heart pounded as she clutched the figurine in her pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the stakes. It didn't take long for someone to notice them. A woman with sharp features and piercing gray eyes approached, her movements smooth and deliberate. She wore a tailored black suit, her demeanor radiating quiet authority. You don't belong here, the woman said, her voice low and measured. Her eyes flicked to Dana, then back to Ava. Who sent you? Ava met her gaze, her expression unreadable. Eleanor Vance. The woman's eyes narrowed, but she didn't seem surprised. Come with me. Ava and Dana exchanged a glance, but followed silently as the woman led them to a secluded corner of the gallery. She stopped in front of a large, abstract painting, a chaotic swirl of colors and shapes that seemed to pulse with hidden energy. Without a word, she reached out and pressed her hand against the canvas. To Ava's astonishment, the wall behind it shifted, revealing a hidden doorway. This way, the woman said, stepping inside. Ava and Dana followed her into a dimly lit room filled with shelves of books, scrolls, and artifacts. At the center of the room stood a long table, and around it sat a group of people who watched their arrival with quiet intensity. Who are you? One of them asked, an older man with silver hair and a voice like gravel. Ava stepped forward, pulling the figurine from her pocket and placing it on the table. My name is Ava Ramirez. Eleanor Vance left this behind, along with a painting that the Covenant is willing to kill for. I think she was trying to send it to you. The room fell silent, the weight of Ava's words settling over the group. Finally, the older man leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he examined the figurine. If what you're saying is true, he said, his voice heavy with meaning, then you've just declared war on the Covenant. And there's no turning back. Ava's jaw tightened, her resolve unshaken. Good, she said. Because I'm not here to run. I'm here to fight. The room erupted into quiet murmurs, the archivists exchanging glances. Finally, the woman who had brought them in spoke. Then you'll need our help, she said. And if Eleanor trusted you enough to send you here, we'll give it. For the first time in days, Ava felt a glimmer of hope. The fight against the Covenant was far from over, but now she wasn't fighting alone. The room settled into a tense silence as the weight of Ava's declaration hung in the air. The archivists exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of caution and intrigue. Ava could feel their eyes on her, probing, testing her resolve. She stood firm, her hands clenched at her sides, the weight of Eleanor's figurine still lingering in her palm. She could sense that this was a pivotal moment. Either they would accept her as an ally, or they'd cast her out to face the Covenant alone. Finally, the older man with the silver hair spoke again, his voice measured but laced with curiosity. If Eleanor trusted you enough to leave behind her secrets, then perhaps we should listen. But understand this, aligning with us will put a target on your back bigger than you can imagine. The Covenant's reach is vast, and they don't tolerate betrayal. I'm already their target, Ava said, her voice steady. They know I have the painting, and they've already tried to kill me for it. I'm not here to play it safe, I'm here to finish what Eleanor started. There was a ripple of approval among the group, subtle nods and murmurs of agreement. The sharp-eyed woman in the tailored suit stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Ava. You say you have her painting. Does it contain what we think it does? Ava hesitated for a moment, then nodded. It's not just a painting, it's a map. A timeline of the Covenant's history. I don't know what all of it means yet, but it's enough to make them desperate to get it back. The room shifted as the archivists leaned in, their interest piqued. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. Do you have it with you? It's safe, Ava said curtly, unwilling to reveal its location just yet. She didn't fully trust them, not yet. But I didn't come here to hand it over. I came here for help. Eleanor believed in you. She believed you could take them down. I need to know how. The older man leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Taking down the Covenant isn't as simple as exposing their secrets, he said. They've spent centuries building their network. They have allies in every corner of society, politics, finance, law enforcement. If you strike at them carelessly, they'll bury the truth before it ever sees the light of day. Ava's jaw tightened. Then what do you suggest? The woman stepped forward again, her sharp gaze almost dissecting Ava. We fight them the way they fight us, through strategy, subterfuge, and leverage. The painting is a weapon, yes, but it's also bait. If they're desperate enough to kill for it, we can use it to draw them out, to expose their vulnerabilities. What kind of vulnerabilities? Dana interjected, her voice hesitant but firm. She had been silent until now, her wide eyes taking in the scene, but Ava could see the determination behind her question. The woman turned to Dana, her expression softening slightly. The Covenant thrives on secrecy. Their power comes from the shadows, from the fact that no one knows they exist. If we can dismantle their veil of secrecy, we can weaken them. But to do that, we need more than just Eleanor's painting. We need their records, their communications, their alliances. Eleanor left us breadcrumbs, but we need the whole loaf. Ava frowned. Eleanor's ledger, the one I found in her studio, it's filled with names, transactions, and cryptic notes. Could that help? The older man nodded gravely. It's a start. If the ledger contains the kind of information we think it does, it could lead us to key players in their network. But deciphering it won't be easy. The Covenant doesn't leave anything to chance. Their codes are designed to mislead and confuse. Dana straightened in her chair, her hands clenched into fists. Then let me help, she said. I'm a forensic accountant. I've broken financial trails before. If there's a way to trace their money or their operations, I can find it. The woman regarded Dana with a mixture of respect and skepticism. You're brave, she said. But bravery alone won't protect you. Once you start digging, they'll know. They'll come for you. Dana glanced at Ava, fear flickering in her eyes, but she squared her shoulders. Let them come. I'm not backing down. Ava felt a surge of pride for her friend, but quickly refocused on the immediate task. What's our first step? She asked, her tone resolute. The older man stood, his movements slow but purposeful. He walked over to a heavy bookshelf and pulled out a slim, leather-bound book. He opened it to reveal a map, its surface marked with symbols and annotations that Ava couldn't decipher. This is where we believe the Covenant stores their most sensitive records, he said, pointing to a location on the map. A private estate in the Alps, heavily guarded and nearly impenetrable. If the painting is a timeline, then this is likely where the other pieces of the puzzle are kept. But getting in won't be easy. Ava studied the map, her mind already racing with possibilities. What kind of security are we talking about? State of the art, the woman said. Motion sensors, armed guards, encrypted locks. It's not just a vault, it's a fortress. Dana let out a low whistle. And you think we can break into that? The older man closed the book, his expression grim. If we want to destroy the Covenant, we don't have a choice. Ava nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we'll figure it out. But before we do anything, I need to know one thing. The room fell silent as she looked each of the archivists in the eye. If we go through with this, if we take the fight to them, are you with us? Or are we on our own? The sharp-eyed woman stepped forward, her expression unyielding. If Eleanor believed in you, then so will we. But make no mistake, this won't be easy, and it won't be clean. People will get hurt. Some of us may not make it out. Ava's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I'm not afraid of getting my hands dirty. The older man extended his hand, his gaze steady. Then welcome to the fight, Detective Ramirez. Ava shook his hand, her grip firm. The Covenant had spent centuries building their empire of shadows, but now, for the first time, they were being hunted. And Ava Ramirez wasn't going to stop until she brought them crashing down. The night wore on as the archivists held an impromptu war council in their hidden room. Maps, documents, and blueprints cluttered the large central table, their edges curling under the dim light of a single hanging bulb. Ava stood at one end, her arms crossed, taking in the details of the estate the archivists claimed housed the Covenant's most sensitive records. The building was remote, heavily fortified, and surrounded by layers of security that seemed designed to repel even the most determined intruder. This place is a fortress, Dana muttered, running a hand through her hair as she studied the blueprints. Guards, cameras, motion detectors, we'd need an army to break into this. An army would only draw attention, the sharp-eyed woman interjected. The Covenant thrives on silence. They'd burn the place to the ground before they let us expose them. This has to be surgical. Ava tapped her fingers against the table, her mind racing. What about the staff? She asked. Do they rotate shifts? Are there any gaps in their schedule? The older man, who had introduced himself as Callum, nodded. The estate's staff consists of loyalists, people so entrenched in the Covenant system that they'd sooner die than betray it. But there's one vulnerability. Supply runs. Every 3 weeks, a private contractor delivers provisions and equipment. Those trucks get through the perimeter without raising suspicion. Ava leaned in, her gaze sharpening. If we can intercept one of those trucks, we could use it to get inside. It's a start, Callum said, though his tone remained cautious. But once you're in, you'll need to disable the security grid. The estate's network is isolated, no outside access. It'll be up to you and your team to handle it on site. Dana paled slightly. Let me guess, you want me to take care of that? The sharp-eyed woman, who had introduced herself as Evelyn, gave Dana a small, approving nod. You said you wanted to help. This is your chance. Dana swallowed hard but nodded. All right. But I'll need to know what kind of system they're using. If it's encrypted, I'll need time to break in. We'll get you what you need, Evelyn said. But once you're inside, time won't be on your side. The Covenant's response time is fast. You'll need to work quickly. Ava straightened, her expression resolute. We'll handle it. What about the records? Where exactly are they kept? Callum pointed to a section of the blueprints that depicted a heavily reinforced basement. Here. The vault. It's designed to withstand everything from fire to explosives. You won't be able to force it open. Then we'll need the access codes, Ava said, her mind already working through the possibilities. Who has them? Only the estate's keeper, Evelyn replied. He's an old guard within the Covenant, someone who's been with them for decades. His name is Alistair Kane. If you can find him, you might be able to extract the codes. Ava's eyes narrowed. And if he doesn't cooperate? Evelyn's expression darkened. Then you'll have to decide how far you're willing to go. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Ava glanced at Dana, who looked pale but determined. This was bigger than either of them, and the stakes were higher than they'd ever faced. But Ava knew there was no turning back. The Covenant had taken too much, and now it was time to take something from them. 2 days later, the team stood on the edge of a desolate road, the cold mountain air biting at their skin. The intercepted supply truck idled nearby, its engine a low rumble in the quiet night. Ava adjusted the collar of her jacket, her eyes scanning the towering trees that surrounded them. They were deep in the wilderness now, the estate just a few miles up the winding road. Evelyn and Callum were with them, each dressed in dark clothing that blended into the shadows. Dana sat in the front of the truck, her laptop balanced on her knees as she ran through the final checks on her equipment. This is our last chance to back out, Evelyn said, her voice low but firm. Once we're inside, there's no room for hesitation. The Covenant won't show mercy. Ava tightened her gloves, her expression hard. We're not backing out. Callum stepped forward, handing Ava a small device. This is a signal jammer. It'll buy you some time once you disable the security grid, but it won't last long. Use it wisely. Ava nodded, slipping the device into her pocket. Let's move. The team climbed into the truck, the tension palpable as they began their ascent toward the estate. The road twisted and turned, the dense forest giving way to the estate's imposing gates. Security cameras tracked their approach, but the truck's forged credentials held. The gates groaned open, and the truck rolled inside. Ava's heart pounded as she took in the estate's sprawling grounds. The main building loomed ahead, its stone facade illuminated by floodlights. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements methodical and precise. This was a place built to keep secrets, and to keep people out. The truck came to a stop near a loading dock, and the team moved quickly, unloading the crates they'd brought as cover. Ava and Evelyn slipped away, blending into the shadows as they made their way toward the main building. Dana stayed behind in the truck, her laptop open as she prepared to access the estate's network. Are you ready? Ava asked through the comms. Dana's voice crackled in her earpiece. Almost. Give me 30 seconds. Ava and Evelyn waited in the cover of a nearby hedge, their eyes scanning the guards who roamed the grounds. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, every noise amplified by the silence around them. Finally, Dana's voice came through again. I'm in. Disabling the cameras now. The security cameras blinked off, and Ava and Evelyn moved swiftly, slipping through a side entrance and into the building. The interior was as opulent as it was cold, its marble floors and high ceilings echoing every footstep. They navigated the hallways carefully, following the blueprints they'd memorized. When they reached the basement entrance, Ava paused, her hand resting on the door's keypad. Dana, we're at the vault. How does it look on your end? There's a secondary lock on the vault door, Dana said. It's biometric. You'll need the keeper's fingerprint to get in. Evelyn cursed under her breath. That means Kane. Ava nodded grimly. Let's find him. Alistair Kane was in his private study, a glass of brandy in his hand and a book open on his lap, when Ava and Evelyn found him. The older man looked up sharply as they entered, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Who are you? He demanded, his voice steady despite the intrusion. Ava raised her weapon, her expression cold. We're the people who are going to end the Covenant. And you're going to help us. Kane's lips curled into a sneer. You have no idea what you're meddling with, do you? The Covenant isn't just an organization, it's an institution. You can't destroy it. Watch us, Ava said, her tone like steel. Give us the access codes to the vault. Kane leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. And if I don't? Evelyn stepped forward, her knife glinting in the dim light. Then we'll make you. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Kane's face. Ava held her breath, the tension thick enough to cut. She didn't want to resort to violence, but she would if it meant stopping the Covenant. Kane met Ava's eyes, his expression defiant. You think you're righteous, don't you? But all you're doing is playing into their hands. The Covenant doesn't fear exposure, it thrives on it. You'll never win. Maybe not, Ava said. But I'll die trying. Kane held her gaze for a long moment, then finally sighed. Fine. But when this all comes crashing down, don't say I didn't warn you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a keycard, tossing it onto the table. Ava grabbed it, her mind already focused on the vault. Kane's words lingered, but she didn't have time to dwell on them. The Covenant's secrets were within reach, and she was going to uncover them, no matter the cost. Ava and Evelyn moved quickly, leaving Alistair Kane restrained in his study. His cryptic warnings echoed in Ava's mind, but she shoved them aside. They were too close to falter now. The keycard felt heavy in her hand, as though it carried the weight of every life the Covenant had ruined. Dana's voice crackled in their earpieces. I'm tracking your location. You've got about 5 minutes before the guards realize something's wrong. You need to move. Understood, Ava replied, her voice sharp and decisive. She and Evelyn descended the final steps into the basement, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The vault door loomed ahead, an imposing slab of reinforced steel that seemed to radiate menace. When they reached it, Ava swiped the keycard through the scanner. A soft beep followed, and the biometric panel lit up. Evelyn retrieved the small device they'd brought, a tool Dana had rigged to replicate Kane's fingerprint from a glass they'd swiped in the study. She pressed it against the panel, holding her breath as the scanner processed the input. A moment later, the lock clicked, and the massive door began to slide open. Inside, the vault was both sterile and ominous. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers labeled with cryptic identifiers. Shelves held meticulously organized artifacts, journals, and photographs. A central table was covered with open documents and maps, their contents hinting at the Covenant's vast reach. This is it, Evelyn whispered, her voice tinged with awe. This is everything. Ava didn't waste time marveling. She pulled out her phone and began snapping photos of everything in sight. Every document, every map, every artifact could be a piece of the puzzle. Dana's voice came through again, more urgent this time. You've got company. 2 guards heading toward the basement. You need to hurry. We're almost done, Ava said, her tone clipped. She turned to Evelyn. Start gathering anything portable. We can't carry it all, but we need as much as we can get. Evelyn nodded and began stuffing documents into a satchel. Ava moved to the central table, her eyes scanning the open files. One in particular caught her attention, a ledger filled with names and dates. Some of the names were familiar: politicians, CEOs, cultural icons. Others were complete mysteries. But all of them were tied to the covenant. She snapped a photo of the page, her stomach twisting at the realization of just how deep the covenant's influence ran. They weren't just a shadowy organization, they were the architects of power itself. "Ava," Evelyn hissed. "We've got to go. Now." Ava grabbed one last set of documents and stuffed them into her jacket. The two women bolted from the vault, the heavy door sliding shut behind them with a mechanical groan. They sprinted up the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. When they reached the ground floor, chaos greeted them. Guards were swarming the estate, their radios crackling with orders. Dana's voice came through the earpiece, tense and frantic. "I've got the truck ready near the north gate. You'll have to run for it." Evelyn glanced at Ava, her jaw tight. "We're not getting out of here without a fight." Ava's hand went to her sidearm, her grip firm. "Then let's make it count." They moved through the estate like shadows, staying low and darting between cover. The guards were organized but spread thin, their movements betraying uncertainty. Ava and Evelyn used it to their advantage, taking out two guards silently as they made their way toward the north gate. When they reached the final stretch, the truck came into view, its engine idling. Dana was in the driver's seat, her face pale but determined. She waved frantically at them through the windshield. "Go!" Ava yelled, shoving Evelyn toward the truck as she turned to lay down cover fire. The guards had spotted them, and gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the stone walls. Evelyn reached the truck and hauled herself inside, but Ava lingered, her weapon trained on the advancing guards. She fired in controlled bursts, forcing them to take cover. "Ava!" Dana screamed. "Get in!" Ava sprinted the last few yards, throwing herself into the back of the truck as Dana floored the gas pedal. The vehicle lurched forward, tearing through the gates and onto the winding mountain road. The sound of gunfire faded behind them, replaced by the roar of the engine and the pounding of Ava's heart. She collapsed against the side of the truck, her chest heaving. Evelyn sat across from her, clutching the satchel of stolen documents. Dana glanced at them through the rearview mirror, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Did we get it?" Dana asked, her voice shaking. Ava nodded, holding up the ledger. "We got it. But they'll come after us." "We'll be ready," Evelyn said, her expression grim. "This is just the beginning." The reckoning. Back at the archivist's safe house, the atmosphere was electric. The stolen documents were spread across the table, a treasure trove of secrets that laid bare the Covenant's operations. Names, dates, financial records, and coded messages, it was all there. Callum leaned over the table, his eyes scanning the pages with a mix of awe and horror. "You've done it," he said softly. "This is everything we need to expose them." "But how do we use it?" Dana asked. "If we go public, won't they just bury the story? Or worse, come after us?" "They'll try," Callum admitted. "But this is too big to ignore. We'll leak it strategically, piece by piece. Not through mainstream channels, they're compromised. But through independent networks, whistleblowers, people the Covenant can't silence." Ava crossed her arms, her expression hard. "And what about revenge? They've killed people to protect their secrets. They won't stop until they're destroyed." Evelyn met her gaze, her eyes blazing. "Then we destroy them. We use their own tools against them. Manipulate their allies, dismantle their finances, expose their crimes. We won't just shine a light on the Covenant, we'll burn them to the ground." Ava nodded, her resolve unshaken. "Good. Because I'm not stopping until they're finished." Over the next few weeks, the archivists launched a coordinated assault on the Covenant. Leaks began appearing online, anonymous reports detailing corruption, bribery, and murder. Protests erupted as the public began to piece together the truth. High-profile figures were arrested, their ties to the Covenant laid bare. The Covenant fought back, but their once unshakable foundation began to crumble. The members turned on each other, their secrets too dangerous to protect. Ava watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and fury. The battle wasn't over, but the tides had turned. One night, as Ava stood on the balcony of the safe house, Evelyn joined her. The two women stared out at the city below, its lights twinkling like stars. "You've done something extraordinary," Evelyn said quietly. Eleanor would have been proud. Ava didn't respond immediately. She thought of Eleanor, of the sacrifices she'd made, and of the painting that had started it all. "It's not over," she said finally. "But for the first time, I think we have a chance." Evelyn nodded. "And we'll see it through. Together." As the night deepened, Ava allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The Covenant had underestimated her, and now they were paying the price. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. The shadows no longer belonged to the Covenant. They belonged to her.